Greetings and welcome back to room 303 in our Chats with Emily, as we're calling our reading through the poetry of Emily Dickinson. We're reading the poems from the Johnson edition, and we turn now to poem 161, A Feather from the Whippoorwill. Of course, the Whippoorwill already being mentioned in poem 31. Emily sent this poem with a sprig of white pine to Sam Bowles, and that makes some sense because this is going to be a poem about poetry and about inspiration and about writing. We've seen this already in a number of the poems we've studied thus far. Our assumptions are that you have been studying with us at learnstrong.net, down that left-hand side. Again, Chats with Emily, our playlist. I'm hopeful that you've already been introduced to our set of introductory comments. I'm hopeful that you've been reading these preceding poems. We just finished at poem 160 with Just Lost When I Was Saved. Now, we're back to Emily and her fascination with music. We're back to Emily and her love of nature as being so much the inspiration, borrowing obviously from Emerson. A feather from the whippoorwill that everlasting sings, whose galleries are sunrise, whose opera the springs, whose emerald nest the ages span, of mellow murmuring thread, whose beryl egg what schoolboys hunt in recess overhead. Now, I think that the key of this poem, and we've said this before, Emily loves maybe a single word as a fulcrum word, as we've referenced it a number of times. I think the word is thread. And I think that the game that Emily's playing here is a game that's very, very classically ancient. That is the game of Penelope on the island of Ithaca in the Odyssey. And remember, she says to the would-be wooer suitors, we've given full lectures at learnstrong.net on the entire poem, The Odyssey. You guys remember that section, though, when she says, I want to marry one of you, but first I have to weave this burial shroud. And by day she weaves, and by night she undoes it. This idea of the thread, that there has to be this thread of inspiration that begins, of course, with the idea of a feather. A feather from the whippoorwill, that everlasting, and of course that's another key word here, this idea of writing something poetically inspired that could last. I think Emily was deeply concerned about the fact she was writing all these poems. I mean, a number of us have commented on, we're going to try and study and read every one of the 1,775 poems contained in the Johnson edition. Well, good heavens, that's a whole lot of thinking about poems. That's so many poems. But then we respond by saying, wait, but somebody wrote all those poems and never intentionally published one of them? The idea of writing and sharing so much of this amazing genius stuff, and then wondering if anyone would ever even find a single feather, that anyone would ever find a single thread. I think it's a fair way to read a poem like this, that standing behind a lot of this is the question of the everlasting. But then to the word sings, that is to say poetry as singing. And then we've got four of these whose galleries are sunrise. Again, we're back to this notion of music. This makes us think about our discussions and our studies of Walt Whitman, all the poems of Leaves of Grass. We have those posted at learnstrong.net, Talks with Walt. And you'll remember how much he always was talking as well about music. And of course, he loved opera, as of course did Emily. Whose galleries are sunrise, whose opera the springs. In other words, all related to nature. Whose emerald nest, notice capitalized, whose emerald nest the ages spin. This idea of spinning and thread is central as well, right? Of mellow murmuring thread. Notice the use of the dashes here with mellow and murmuring, and then after thread, notice. And of course, these sounds that are so beautiful here as well, of mellow murmuring thread. And again, we're back to poem 56 with this use of the word murmuring. And then we go to beryl, whose beryl egg, beryl will get used in poem not just 161, but 737 and 776. And that idea of the beryl egg, in other words, the thing that's hidden that, schoolboys will hunt in recess overhead. Well, if this poem was in fact sent to Sam Bowles, and it was, and of course the discussion was about publishing a poem. And of course the fact that Emily constantly is talking about building the nest, the perennial nest from an earlier poem, then I think the point that she's making at 2a is that the quest for poetic inspiration is so fragile. It's so difficult and yet so precious to, I think, to Emily and to us and obviously to civilization. At 2B, I love the repetitions here, of course, whom's, and of course her use of the word barrel. At 3A, how are we going to relate this to another title? Guys, I'd like to challenge us to think about Virginia Woolf's Room of One's Own and the way in which that majestic essay and the ways in which we've commented fully at learnstrong.net on this essay, but the way in which that quest to find a moment of solitude, that one can create something that might be, in this poem, everlasting. Finally, at 3B, what about creativity? And how have you sought to be creative? And I'm hopeful that your study of these poems by Emily Dickinson is helping that happen. Thank you.